regulators responding to accounting scandals at the companies placed temporary restraints on both Fannie and Freddie that curtailed their lending just as housing prices were really taking off. Also, they didn't do any they didn't do any subprime lending because they can't by law. So whatever bad incentives the implicit federal guarantee creates have been offset by the fact that the guarantee, of course, that they can't go out of business. He acknowledged that they're going to be rescued. That whatever the federal guarantee creates have been offset by the fact that Fannie and Freddie were and are tightly regulated with regard to the risks they can take. You could say that Fannie and Freddie experience shows that regulation works. Now, I asked people who were well informed directly for this guy named Ed Pinto, who worked for Fannie and Freddie. I asked him, how could Krugman have possibly made, where did this idea of a law? How could he just have made that up? Was there any smoke to that fire? Any way in which he could have directed that up? And everybody scratches their head. They don't know how he could have made that one up. And one of the things, at the New York Times there are fact checkers, and embarrassed there are fact checkers, by the way. And I can tell you that at the New Yorker there are fact checkers. I can tell you, I was once quoted in a New Yorker article and spoke to the journalist John Cassidy in this case about productivity. And I can show you an objective case about how an article can be thoroughly checked and fact checked and yet be completely wrong. But it helps to be fact checked. Robert, sitting there, was changing slides. He's one of our fact checkers. And he does me a lot of work, checking my facts, making sure I've got it right. But Krugman is never even fact checked. There's no way. If a fact checker like Robert were to walk up to Krugman and say, he would underline this thing, and he would say, I couldn't find a law that forbids Fannie and Freddie from going to subprime lending. Could you show me where that law is? That's what a fact checker would ask. That article hopefully never would have been printed, because in fact it was completely made up. Now, it's difficult to know what Krugman could have known at the time, but the title of this, the date of this article was in 2008. Next slide. And this is maybe a little more than me, but I was thinking, well, what could somebody have known, just looking around about what Fannie and Freddie were really up to? Well, here's an article in the Mortgage Bankers magazine, the Traders magazine, in which top executives of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae have made no bones about their interest in buying loans major borrowers, formally considered the problems of non-prime and other niche lenders. I mean, it was all out there. And I ran into an economist who told me that the GSEs, the Fannie and Freddie, couldn't buy subprime loans because he read that from Krugman. I mean, the more blatant the lie, I guess the more convincing it becomes. But this is not a trade magazine.
That's from December 2004.
Yes, but Krugman was writing in 08. No, he was writing in 08. No, all I'm saying is that at the time it was known, if you were in the real estate market, he's writing about how they couldn't. This is when they're launching themselves in the subprime market. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying there were other ways of knowing that they were getting heavily into subprime. But I'm just using it as an easy example. If you just search around the literature, were they in subprime at all? Well, speaking to a packed house, Richard Simon, chairman and chief executive at Freddie Mac, said, our success in the future depends on our ability to serve emerging markets. They will be the surging markets. And then, next page, Fannie Mae chairman chimed in. That's Franklin Raines, who walked away with a fortune from Fannie. He told mortgage bankers in San Francisco that we need to learn the best from the subprime market and bring the best of the prime market into that market. He offered praise for some non-prime lenders, and then he said some of the best marketers in financial services. I'm just citing, often you can react by saying, well, he made it up, but he had a wrong impression, it was difficult to know. I'm just trying to cite an easy example of the fact that if you actually just delved into the internet a little bit about what Fannie and Freddie were doing, then you would have known that they were getting massively into subprime at the time. That was being announced in the trade association. So, again, I'm trying to be fair and not fault anybody for honest mistakes. And in this case, it was sheer dishonesty. But let me shift slides. And now this is something that Krugman could not have known. Now I apologize for those tiny numbers, which you're not going to be able to read from the back. These numbers were put together by a guy named Ed Pinto, who was the chief credit officer of Fannie Mae in 1989. He'd been with Fannie Mae for several years as a mortgage consultant, and he took a snapshot in time. He's now written much more extensively about what went on, but he's tried to show that something must have gone on, because by mid-2008, of the federal share of all of the high-risk mortgages was 70%, and the principal value of that federal share was 60%. I'm sorry to ask all those words are under entity. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac own much of it. FHA had a lot of it. The Community Reinvestment Act and HUD had a lot. And if you look at that, at all of the share that was owned, it was basically in the hands of the feds. And so it's almost like blaming a bad harvest in the Soviet Union on the private plots that were being tilled by the average peasant, and not blaming government-run agriculture. Because government-run agriculture in the Soviet Union was actually, obviously, most of it. In this case, again, it wasn't by far all of it, but it was more than half by either of those two measures. And so, if by 2008 they had gotten such a huge share, you would imagine that something else was known about what happened between 2004 and 2008 in terms of what Fannie Mae was doing. And indeed, a lot could have been known, but more increasingly comes to light. So we would have known that. Now, that's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and that's the government. So to summarize briefly what we've done, but we have to do something further. What we've done is we've talked about the assault on the market that was engineered by the Fed, by its 1% interest rates, and its effect on the housing market. But that wouldn't have been enough to cause the Great Recession. Now we're talking about a massive movement into high-risk mortgages by government-sponsored agencies, by FHA and Fannie. It's a long, it's a long and amazing story, and I'm only giving it to you in broad brushstrokes. But now I want to get back to the next slide. So the key question having to do with the private sector, because clearly, I said it was 70% of high-risk mortgages in the hands of the federal government, one way or the other, in terms of the secondary market. And I said that 60% of the principal value is in the hands of the federal. What about all of those mortgages that were in the hands of the private sector? I've said that deregulation can't be at fault. But I'm now going to make another argument about our crony capitalist system and talk about the distortions that arise from that system in the way the capitalists behave. So the way I phrase the question, again, is how did the banker, as I put up in that slide, the banker we love to hate, the SOB in starch collar, who wouldn't give you the mortgage because your credit wasn't good, get replaced by the banker we now have learned to hate, the crap shooter who gave everyone the mortgages. Now, I'm going to deal with a few strands of the story, and in fact, interestingly enough, it starts in the 90s. And the thesis I want to put forward to you is a variation on Friedrich Hayek's line that under socialism the worst get on top. I think that one of the points, and I've said this a lot to some of the colleagues who have been writing about this, I think one of the points that they miss, and it's difficult indeed, if you press me, I'm not going to be able to use an easy example of it, but what they miss is that the people who start to run our financial institutions become different. The best analogy I can give you is that when the monetary expansion-based internet bubble was occurring, then we had a classic situation in which the young momentum players were making all the money, were making 30% a year. The old-line fundamentalists who believed that you bought companies because they could make profits were being elbowed aside as hopeless lames. And then, in fact, by 98, 99, we began to find that certain of the more staid investment funds were beginning to start playing the momentum game as well. And by the way, that's a standard point, a subtle point about Austrian business cycle theory. If the interest rate is too low and there's euphoria and a bubble forming, well, shouldn't everybody hold back? Shouldn't businessmen learn? Well, one of the points is that it's difficult to hold back because if they're making 30% and you're flat and making 2%, you could lose your job in the process. But also, there still are always in every society, every economy, every financial market, plenty of management